Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. You're listening to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 90. This one safeguard could prevent huge fines. Simon, before we dive into this today, let's just clarify what we're talking about. Let's just set out clearly.
Sure. So when lead buyers are buying leads from agencies or lead generators, there's a few problems that they can come up against. And if they don't put the right safeguards in place, which plenty don't, they're going to feel the impact of it one way or another.
And what are these problems?
So the problems that they might feel, so the impacts, I guess, would be fines. So this can be from regulatory bodies, ICO, FCA, whatever else could harm them, I guess. Bad PR, which is a really bad problem for large brands especially, and they'll actively try and buy good PR to then mitigate against the bad PR. So it has like a double whammy cost and brand effect. And then on the actual data they're contacting, if there's some sort of issue with it, it also leaves a bad brand impression as well. Word of mouth happens in B2C as much as it does in B2B. So that, is an unknown quantity that happens as part of the problem of buying leads that could have problems with them.
So let's just not to point fingers, but let's sort of look at why this may happen. Why might lead buyers be vulnerable to this, and who is at fault? I don't really want to use that phrase, but let's use it. Who might be at fault? Who might cause this problem?
So to start at the top, the real problem is lead generation has a very low barrier to entry. There's no courses that you have to take. There's no exam or anything else. You can wake up one morning and think, I'm just going to generate some leads today. People literally could. You can go and do it. So that's really where the problem starts. But what we're really talking about is two types of companies that generate leads. So I'm talking about the companies whose job is to generate leads and they sell those leads. So one is a trusted partner. They really know what they're doing. They're experts in generating leads. They're possibly exploring, if not already created, a brand that they use to generate leads. They've started seeing the leads that they generate as their actual customers, not the clients that they sell them to. They want to grow their company, they're honest, trustworthy, and a great place to buy leads from. There's plenty of companies like this. We work with a bunch of them that are our clients, right? I could go through a roll call and name them off and whatever else, but I know a lot of them. But then there's another side to this, which is what I just mentioned. So you wake up in the morning and think, I'm just going to drive some leads today. And their overarching desire is cash, right? And they don't see leads as people particularly. They see it as pound signs. And the clients that they work with, they just want cash, and they will happily either dupe you in some way to get that cash from you, and they'll dupe the customer as well. I mean, they're just sitting in the middle. There's sort of nefarious means that people will use. And don't imagine this is like the mafia or something. This isn't like some organized crime particularly. This is just literally someone sitting there thinking, how can I make more money? And it could be a company as well. I know plenty of companies that do this. This isn't what I'm talking about. Isn't unusual. Isn't rare. This is like a daily thing for quite a few companies who explore ways to take cash from companies and take the piss out of people and their data. So that's basically why it happens. But how it happens is slightly different. So you obviously, the catalyst is someone that's prepared to carry out these nefarious things. But how it happens is the ad is mis-selling, which is something we know about and is a problem. And if you're not tracking that ad, you don't know what's generating the lead. The data wasn't collected how you think it was. So it's 2 days old, a week old, a month old. It's been blended in with real-time leads that are being sent. Who knows? Or the customer experience is off, which is, it could actually be like a legitimate ad, so someone wouldn't necessarily fall foul of the law, but it's just it's a juxtaposition to what's actually going to happen once you receive the lead, which is also like it's not collected how you think. So that's sort of how it happens.
I think what's interesting here is it's the lead buyer that is potentially the most vulnerable, because they're buying the lead and they may be the people who receive these fines from the ICO or whatever, but they're not carrying out the actions. So I think that's ultimately, to bring it back to, I know we talked about more stuff, but to bring it back around to the podcast title, that is ultimately why we sort of need to talk about these safeguards that need to put in place. Because as a lead buyer, you may very well sort of be completely unaware about what's going on. You might not know that lead generation is doing this. So, there's a few things actually I want to discuss. So it's that, what are the safeguards? But also, I guess it comes down to how to identify, who are the good lead generators who are going to be representing your brand well, and who are the bad ones. Like, if you're listening to this, you might be thinking, well, I don't know. Like, it's hard to work out. Like, there's no transparency between people. Like, can I trust this person or not? So two questions, two parts of that is, how do lead buyers identify who the good ones and the bad ones are, and what are the safeguards they can put in place to make themselves less vulnerable to it?
Yeah, so lead buying is also a part of this problem, right? Which is, if you're buying leads and doing it for sales, I can guarantee you'll experience less of the problems than if you're buying leads and trying to just buy them at the cheapest cost that you can. So that's one thing to look at within it. But how you identify the good and the bad sources. So I mean, like, number one is if a company's just been set up and someone contacts you, unless it's like a trusted source or whatever, it's potentially like tread carefully. And I'm sure some of them might be right, might be a new company set up, whatever. But like you mentioned, it's the lead buyer that bears the brunt of most of the problems that are incurred from this. So if you're a lead generator who isn't particularly bothered about that brand or looking to achieve anything with it, you just set a new one up, close one down, set another one up. I know plenty of people that do this.
Yeah.
Or have done it. I don't know them, like, talking to them every day. I know a lot of people that have done it. I know a lot of characters that do these sort of things. So that's one thing. The other is exploring every landing page that they drive leads on, whether or not it's even within the vertical that you're going to be buying leads from them in. Asking for all the adverts that they drive leads on, asking for recommendations from other companies that they work with, asking for any other reviews or anything that they've done, and asking all their terms, the privacy policies. I go through the privacy policies that they sign leads up with. If they're an agency or a broker in some way that you're working with, you want to go through a fine-tooth comb exactly where they're buying data from. So the answer is all in the details. There's only one specific thing that you can do where you can go, aha, I can catch them. It's basically like a process, a series of steps that you go through.
To clarify that, when I call this podcast the one safeguard, that is entirely wrong. I'm going to stick with it because I've done it already. I've said it.
Yeah, there's one safeguard which is do all of that.
So, yeah, just do it all. Okay, that's fine. We can admit
but yeah, I mean, this is like this isn't like a creative aspect that you're going to be carrying out. It's a bit more like investigative work, I guess you'd call it, where you're exploring the loopholes that could be used. I mean, I don't know if this still happens because I don't buy leads anymore. But we used to get companies when we were buying leads that just send us a landing page and go, generate it on here. And I'd be like, that is absolute bullshit. Like, number one, it doesn't even work properly. Like, I can't actually fill this thing in. There's something that's stopped somewhere. Number two, I don't believe that anyone could ever generate leads on this.
So you think they were sort of sending you a fake page to make it seem like they're doing things in a certain way, but like they're actually generating these as well. It was just like list data or something.
Well, you and I both know, because you sent it to me, that there is a Facebook group, a well-known Facebook group for lead generators, where someone advised other people to create fake pages to get them to sign campaigns off, and they use a different one to drive traffic to.
I'm going to go entirely off piece here, and seeing as my title for this podcast has been shredded to bits, we may as well just do that. Go somewhere else entirely. But I was thinking about doing this post on LinkedIn earlier, and I thought it's not quite right. So I'll revisit it, but I'll revisit it now and see what you think. The idea was simply that I think there's this almost bad perception of lead generation amongst some brands. Not all, but like some people are a bit wary of lead generation. Even the term is maybe a bit out of fashion in a way. Like here's one of the things. And I think part of it is to do with the fact that, like you were saying before, there's low barrier to entry. You have these Facebook groups where you've got people finding ways to literally tell you how to scam brands and things like that. Mm. And the problem is, I think people are conflating this old way of doing lead gen with the kind of lead generation we talk about in the podcast, this new way of doing it when you've got ethical people, you've got transparency, you've got high intent. But they're sort of like confusing the two things, they're mixing them together. And I think this is like an ultimate problem that both good lead generators, professional ones, and lead buyers face when it comes to lead generation as a marketing tactic. It's the confusion. We almost need a new name for this new way of doing lead gen that's like doesn't have all the negative connotations or something. Like I say, this wasn't a clear crystallized post, but an idea.
Well, yeah, and I think the way that the new way or the future way of doing, because that old way still exists and is a massive problem, right? But like you say, I'm sure that a lot of brands, it puts them off, or there's a well-known brand that will now only work with lead generators that are signed up to the FCA. They don't necessarily even have to do that, but they've had that many problems and that many different things. They've just said there's hardly any that exist that have done that, so we're going to do it. But yeah, I think we look at it, or what we talk about is partnerships. It's like a seesaw. One side, or not a seesaw, it's balanced, because it doesn't keep going down. But one side isn't necessarily overly important to the other. It's that one side's doing more direct response marketing and the other's doing sales, and the two are sort of meeting and creating this holistic experience for the customer, who's the most important part of that, and they come in. And yeah, I think what you just said is a massive problem. And the stuff that we're talking about is the thing that fuels it. And there's another one within this that just while you were talking, I thought about is I even know trusted lead generators who have traffic being. I just want to tell you that how low the barrier to entry is within this. You can say you're a lead generator and not even generate any leads. And what happens is you have a landing page. You go out to someone, an agency, who will drive traffic from Facebook, potentially other means, to your page. It usually works with Facebook, and you'll figure out why when I'll tell you how. They'll drive traffic to an advertorial. On the advertorial is some sort of tracking where the brand is trying to figure out, the referrer and whatever else of where the data came from. They think it's either native or it's just landing straight on the landing page, and then from the advertorial, and then from the advertorial to go to the landing page, fill that in, lead gets submitted. And they're paying for it on the CPL, and they're paying for it on the CPL because the ad is of a woman, and pardon my French here, just with basically her tits out, like a bra on, And I've seen it with like equity release, I think it was, or something like that, that said, don't quote me this, I'm just making this up, so it didn't exactly say this, but it was like, equity release helped me pay for these bad boys, or something akin to that, right? So what the brand thinks, or the receiver of the leads, is this advertorial is coming from some native thing. That's the only thing that they can then track it from. The lead gets submitted, and little do they know, this lead generator isn't even driving the traffic themselves either. So I could go onto Unbounce, knock a page up in fucking 30 minutes, bang an advertorial together in Unbounce as well. And I could just nick the copy from someone else, go to someone who will drive traffic using some dubious images like that. I can say to a client, I'm generating these leads on Facebook. It's costing me, I don't know, 20 quid to do it. Give me 30 or 25, blah, blah, blah. Set an API up. I basically don't have to do anything. I've spent an hour creating some landing pages.
What point is that fraud? It feels like
it's only fraud when you catch it, isn't it?
Some deeply philosophical. I can't. Do you know what I mean? Though,
like that,
they're lying to the buyers about how they're generating it. It's like, is that not illegal?
Yeah, effectively, yeah. And this stuff is just, and on this, I mean, I have people, we don't work with very many of them, but it has happened where people have left Dateable because basically we haven't made their fraud easier to commit. So it's like, when it's, why don't you make it easier to carry out X? It's like, because you shouldn't be doing that. So it's like, like going to a bank and sort of saying, why can't you, why is that safe so fucking hard to get into, you bastards?
Yeah.
So and we've gone real off topic, so I don't know if I was something else I wanted to suggest, but this is what you're faced with, is the point as a lead buyer.
Yeah.
And if you don't carry out some checks, and you've got the front end checks, like you mentioned, who you're going to be working with, how can I tell the good from the bad, whatever. Referrals, get everything they've been using to drive traffic. Everything should be open book, like nothing hidden. If this person is just going to be generating traffic, or even if it's an agency, like what are they hiding? You just say, well, I'm not going to work with you if you don't give me X. It's like, they're either going to do it or not. And if they don't, it means they're hiding something. And if someone says, I can understand some people, as agencies might say, well, we've done that before and a client's nicked to X, Y, and Z. Someone wrote this to me on LinkedIn from a post I did. I can't remember. It's a couple of weeks ago, a month ago. Said, yeah, I've shared adverts with a lead buyer before, and they got that advert and gave it to another lead generator and said, why don't you create something like this? This has better conversions than you. And I said back, why don't you create a brand, and then the brand is your moat, i.e. something that resonates more highly with people than just an advert, because that's just using some CRO tricks, right? Like, pointy finger, discounting price, whatever. Yeah, that anyone could, ultimately go and read a fucking advertising book and you'll figure out what to do. But if you create a brand out of your lead gen brand and blah, 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 you'll create a moat and no one can copy that anyway. So you don't worry about ads being copied because, that they're not you. And that's ultimately what you're selling. But the same works vice versa. Like if you're worried someone's going to like steal something, either, get some terms written up so they're not going to do it. And if you don't trust them, don't fucking work with them. That's basically the moral of the story. So the number one thing is carry out all the audits, go through everything, fine-tooth comb, due diligence, fine-tooth comb, get everything, regulatory bodies, do you follow X, what can I speak to previous customers, look at their background. If it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. How are you driving traffic? Go through everything. And then when you start working with them, ask them to send you every single advert that they're using to drive traffic with, and any new advert that gets created, just ask them to send it to you. It's your arse on the line if you don't. So why wouldn't you? You know, like, this isn't a thing of you can't send it anymore. This is like, oh no, like, I am not going to work with you if you don't send me constantly every advert that you use to generate leads. I want every landing page as a URL in the lead. I want the ad that is being generated as a value in the lead. So it'd be like, ad number 2, 3, 4, or they can pass it from Facebook basically, if it depending on how they're delivering the lead. But as long as you've got the image to refer back to, it basically means you've closed the loop on exactly how this lead was generated. The advert, the traffic type. If it's coming from affiliates, you want the email creatives, you want the sub IDs all delivered. Ideally, within the sub IDs, you'd want to know who the traffic source is as well. And then every month you carry out an audit. You ring everybody and sit on a call and go, can you go through how you're driving traffic to me, and just make sure there's no other ads, and all the ads that are sent to you as well, you can sign those off at the time. So you'd be like, don't drive traffic to that, do drive traffic to this. And that is how you put the safeguards in place.
Well done. You brought it back around there after our sort of
mid-podcast. A big long tangent.
Okay, well, we said, this one safeguard could prevent huge fines. I think I need to retitle that, this collection of safeguards under one umbrella could help prevent huge fines and solve those problems we talked about. But I think it ultimately comes down to lead buyers making themselves less vulnerable to the activities of the bad lead generators. Obviously, a whole lot of good ones. We're not talking about that. And yeah, I think that's a good point to end it, because you've listed a few points people can listen to and think, right, I'm going to go through this, make sure I've done this, and this, make sure I'm my due diligence, my audits, all that. And yeah, hopefully they can make themselves less vulnerable and less chance of being fined. So yeah, hopefully there's some value in that, and we'll think about maybe doing it. I mentioned it before, we talked about a due diligence checklist or something, which I think would be quite a cool thing to put out there for people who are looking to buy some leads, a list of things that they need to make sure they've ticked off and they know the answers to. But we'll revisit that in another podcast. But for now, that was episode 90. This one safeguard could prevent huge fines. Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.